Alright, Donnie, I'm going to show you how and when to use this hero block, as people call it. I fucking hate calling it that, just because it's a bit subjective. So in this case, we're going to call this sword side hanging guard, instead of normal offside hanging guard, which I'll explain in a second. So basically, you have a couple ways to guard yourself when you do an attack, when you go to block something. You essentially have your A-frame guards, which include this, 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 and this. Now, the cool thing about these is these are very simple. They block off the whole outside of my body, which can be used very effectively against low-skill opponents, right? A low-skill opponent typically isn't going to do anything or make decisions based off anything crazy. So what they're going to do has pretty easy, predictable returns. So if they throw a cross at me, I just have to block like this typically, and I can return however I want. I can return however I want. If they throw low and across, it's a money shot, I can block my hip, I can return at their arm. I don't have to do anything crazy because they're not doing anything crazy, right? Now, I typically block like this if they're throwing across against a low skill opponent. Why do I do that versus doing this? Doing this, we'll say this is your sword side hanging guard, right? The reason I don't do that is because a low skill opponent, while predictable, is also unpredictable in a way that is really annoying sometimes. If my opponent, I think they're going to throw this cross and they end up doing something weird where they're and do something like this. If I block like this, it'll only block up here and will not block anything down here. The also issue with this is that, one, this looks like it blocks the outside of my body, right? Well, if I turn like this clearly does not block my arm or the front of my body, right? Now, it might block behind me a lot better, right? But the issue is, if you mess up any of your judgment of depth, or your opponent just pulls their sword in a really weird way, you're blocked from winning, right from being a block to not doing shit and just making you look goofy, right? And it's really easy to throw a shot and change it at the last moment to pull it a little bit to where it'll hit here instead of here on the outside, because they're not swinging around you anymore. They're swinging parallel to the surface that you're blocking, right? If they're swinging like this and I block like this, perfectly fine, because the shot's going to come in perpendicular. Liam, quit. But if I block like this, right, like here, it doesn't matter if they pull the shot or not. If they pull it early, it's not going to hit anything. And if they go around, it doesn't matter, right? So this blocks basically everything you need. Sometimes it doesn't, right? This is what I would consider your standard guard, right? Here, whatever. Because it's very good at blocking everything behind it that needs to. The issue with this is blocking the side of my body and not blocking the inside of my body. My dog is being crazy. I'm so sorry. So he's being crazy. So this blocks everything behind it. This blocks to the side. And my body is no longer behind my blocking surface. Now, if they swing all the way around, right, this is great, because they're just going to hit my sword for the most part. If I do this, great, it's going to hit my sword. What I like to consider these, instead of being a standard part of your methodology, I would consider these band-aids. He's being crazy. I would consider these band-aids, or these are going to be called exceptional blocks. Things that I'm going to block or use as a defense mechanism sometimes, not all the time. So what these are really great for are for the circumstances where I need to get a block, but my hand is in a different position, or something not standard, right? Normally, in a standard scheme of when I'm fighting somebody, 80% of my behavior if say I'm in a tournament or whatever, about 80% of my behavior should be fairly standardized, right? If I'm fighting somebody, right, and I throw this shot over here, it elicits a return. I'm gonna block it like this and I'm gonna return back into them. This is something very simple. It should be a very simple strategy, right? Now, what's gonna happen is that the higher skill you get, the more crazy and weird stuff is gonna happen with your opponent. Because they are gonna start doing things, they're gonna be able to read your movements a little bit better. They're gonna be able to see your attacks a little bit better. So being able to defend in a really interesting way is kind of necessary, right? There's some cases where my opponent is not going to sit here and wait for me to throw this attack, I block, I return. They're just not going to do it. Both of us have our own plan, and what's going to happen is when each high skill opponent has their own plan, stuff starts getting really complicated, right? So I typically use this in situations where I'm moving away from somebody, or someone moves in close to me when I was not expecting them to do something, right? Say my opponent moves in while I'm in the middle of a fake. Like, I faked over here, and then I came outside, and maybe I'm in the middle of a wrap, right? And my hand's down like this. I can't make this block like this, right? I can, it's hard though. It takes a long time. You know what would be easier than making this, curved, half circular movement? If I just went like this and closed off the lane. So if I'm faking my opponent out and I come down and they throw a high cross this way, the easiest way for me to get my block back would to be do this and move out of the way. Now, the reason I said I usually do this as I'm moving out of the way is because if I stand there, my hand is in a very awkward position and their sword is in very close proximity to my body, whether I'm blocking like this or like this. And the issue is, if they can throw a second shot very easily and probably hit me before I'm able to return to guard or before I'm able to return to them. So this kind of half block really would be considered a parry or something like that. You have to combine it with movement to give you the other half of the defensive component, right? I can throw a straight block like this in return and not need to move my body at all because I stopped their attack and I'm returning very quickly. And this is just very consistent. When I do this, this works one time. It's a band-aid, right? It worked one time and I need to quickly move out of the way from their sword. If you imagine them throwing a cross at me, I have to move around their sword, one, to expedite my attack, two, to get away from their sword. Because their sword is so close to my body, they can quickly go, and there's nothing I can really do about it. So a mistake you see sometimes is people throw this hanging guard against people who don't throw combos or have terrible efficiency, and they're getting gains out of it because their opponent is bad. I'll tell you right now, if I fake someone out and they immediately went to this hanging guard, I'm just going to slightly pull my shot and chop them in the body real quick. Even if I go like this, and they throw this hanging guard, I'll just go 90% of the time because they don't move their feet. Now, I will say as a lefty, there's plenty of times where I'm going to use this hanging guard to do really intricate stuff, right? I might use it to attack the offside chest on them. So if I'm sitting here fighting, I throw low, they throw up here, I'll do this block as I step in and throw there. But as I do it, it's not just that I'm moving offline. Two, when I throw this attack, I'm going to turn and pivot out of their attack, and now I'm likely perpendicular from where their sword is, right? So if you imagine this person's sword coming down, right, as I catch this block, their sword in space is going to be like this, and I want to turn and get my body out of the way of it. Inversely, I'll just show you if you're fighting a lefty. If you throw this hip shot, and this sword comes down like this, right, you have to imagine it in space like this. I'm going to catch this block, moving away from it, and then turn into it to where I have a good blocking platform. So you kind of want to think as the hero block as it's half of a block. It's kind of a parry, but you need to combine it with movement to make it a full defensive movement. Another thing I would consider, what you should kind of categorize this in your mind as, This is a transitional movement back to my stance or my guard, right? I'm not always using this, but I will use it to get back to my normal guard, right? As a lefty, I throw this hip wrap, right? Well, the issue is my sword is on the outside of their body and they're throwing in like this. If they move in, right, I can't get my sword back to blocking like this, right? I have to immediately set a blocking lane. I have to block the lane, right? Boom. When I do this and I block like this, I'm going to return back like this. Catch it, and I'll return like this. So I'll go here, I'll catch the block, I'll pivot off, and I reset my hand like this. Or from your perspective, I'm here, this shot comes in, I block, I might throw a shot from here on my way back to my guard, right? I may not. Sometimes I'll just go here, I'll catch the block, I'll wait a second, and then I'll come back to my stance, and I'll throw again. But the whole point is you have to use this as a way to transition between attacks and back to your standard guard. So I'm going to use this with my movement. I'm going to use this with my standard guards, right? These are my standard guards. Here, this hero block, this movement helps me get back to the other one. Sometimes I'll go hero block a shot over here and throw like that. But this is not a standard block at all. And for people to be using it as a standard block with no footwork is very bad. But hope that explains that a little bit. To close off with this, I want to go back to how you actually can use this. I just explained that you can use it with movement and defensiveness and stuff like that. When you're in a tournament, the stuff you should be killing with should be your bread and butter stuff. I'm killing people with chops, crosses, and some wraps. I'm going to use a couple fakes with that, nothing crazy. And then I'm going to always come back to my standard guards if I really need to. I'm going to come back to my standard guards most of the time because those give you the most return on your investment, right? If I return like this, high likelihood I'm catching whatever's coming in here. If I return like this, not a high likelihood. Always. It's also easier to work around with your opponent who's fighting very weird, right? And then when you get into higher level tournaments, that's when you're going to start doing weird stuff to trick your opponent out or just to mitigate the chaos, right? This hero block just helps me mitigate some of the chaos of stuff happening, right? There's sometimes, I'm going to throw like this really deep shot. They throw a shot over here. I'm going to squat down, block like this, step over and do that, right? But really think about this as a transitional movement and add it into your pelling as you practice, right? So I might practice, I'm here, my opponent, I throw across like this, I block, standard block, I throw a hip wrap. They go to throw a chop down on my shoulder, I'm stepping off line and blocking, turning back in and then throwing, right? If you're fighting lefties, I'm fighting, I throw, I block, here, boom, and I'm back into my guard. So just think about using this in a flowing type of way, and it works way better than when people just stand there like dickheads, and they throw the shot, they go, and they just stand. They just stand there like this. Like, it's not good. There are people who can do it, but I believe it is a band-aid and not always a good methodology in implementing this technique, if that makes sense.